They have been the cheerleaders for the illegal Ukraine war ever since Vladimir Putin launched his full-scale invasion in 2022. As Russia's soldiers fight and die on the ground, these are the people who have reported on every move that they make, using social media to play their roles in spreading the narrative that the Kremlin wants to create. They are Russia's pro-war bloggers. And for almost 4 years, Putin has been happy to let these bloggers operate because they served a purpose. Not anymore. Paranoid Putin is terrified of everyone, and he's started eradicating his own supporters. Russia's pro-war bloggers are next in the firing line. On November 17th, The Economist published a report claiming that Russia has started to turn against the very bloggers who have for so long played a crucial role in shaping the Ukraine war. The Kremlin's justice machine, if you can call it that, has taken a break from its usual diet of intellectuals, opposition politicians, and LGBT activists and turned inwards, the outlet blared. The bloggers Putin now wants to eradicate, who are often called Z bloggers after the Zs that were on many of the Russian tanks that stormed into Ukraine when Putin launched his supposed special military operation, are catching flack because they are saying too much. We'll explore the reasons for Putin's turnaround later in the video, but for now, you only need to know 3 names to see what the Kremlin is doing to people who were once among Russia's staunchest supporters. Those names are Roman Alyokhin, Tatiana Montian, and Oksana Kobaleva. All 3 have found themselves persecuted by the very government that they have helped prop up, albeit in different ways. Alyokhin, who has a following of 151,000 subscribers on the Russian social media platform Telegram, was labeled a foreign agent by the Kremlin in September, reportedly due to a post he made that criticized the Russian military. Putin has been going a little crazy with his foreign agent designations in recent months. Back in April, the Russian president signed a new law that expanded the criteria he can use to designate an entity as a foreign agent. Now the Kremlin can legally apply this label to anybody whom it accuses of trying to involve others in the collection of information that could harm Russia's military. Perhaps Alyokhin fell victim to this new criterion. If he used any sources, including those within the Russian army, then his posting of information that criticizes the Russian military would fall right under this new description. Thanks to this branding, Alyokhin will have to display some sort of foreign agent labeling on all of the content that he publishes, along with submitting detailed financial records to the Russian Justice Ministry so that it can understand what he earns, how he earns it, and potentially how to use that information to control it. The foreign agent label may end up spelling the end for Alyokhin's blogging career. But compared to the other 2 names we mentioned earlier, Alyokhin may have gotten off lightly. His punishment is certainly lighter than the one doled out to Montian, who is an even bigger Z blogger than Alyokhin, thanks to her following of 400,000. In October, Montian became the first war blogger to be labeled as a terrorist by Russia, suggesting that the Kremlin is going to try to hunt her down and imprison her for what she has posted about the Russian military. Putin may at least have a reason to go after Montian. The Guardian reveals that the commentator is Ukrainian-born, though she has expressed plenty of opinions that suggest that she supports Putin's war. It was Montian that Russia enabled to speak during the February 17, 2022 meeting of the United Nations Security Council, where she expressed the reasons why Putin would go on to launch his full-scale invasion of Ukraine. She declared that Ukraine is little more than a Western colony, and that it was Ukraine that was shelling the Donbass region rather than Russia just days before Putin launched his invasion. You would think that maintaining Montian would be a propaganda victory for the Kremlin. If nothing else, a prominent Ukrainian commentator and lawyer is a useful asset to have when trying to create a pro-Russian narrative. But apparently that usefulness has been outlived, and the woman who betrayed Ukraine to side with Putin has now been betrayed by the brutal leader for whom she has espoused. It's difficult to see Ukraine welcoming Montian back after what she has spent the last few years saying. That means she'll have to go into hiding inside Russia to avoid the Kremlin's wrath. Finally, there's Kobaleva. While the other 2 bloggers we've mentioned have had labels applied to them that make them undesirables within Russia, Kobaleva is already in Putin's clutches. According to BBC Monitoring, she was arrested on November 5th by a Russian anti-extremism police unit following an argument amongst Z bloggers that saw her being accused of having once supported the now-dead protest leader Alexei Navalny. Kobaleva had a smaller following than the other bloggers we've discussed, with just 10,000 Telegram subscribers. But she had been staunchly pro-war, even in posts where she criticized senior officials in the Russian military and her fellow blog propagandists. These are 3 people who support Putin and have demonstrated that support time and time again. But Putin has turned on them, and he is likely to turn on others. At least that's according to Apti Alaudinov, who is a senior Russian defense official who has been quick to tell everybody in Russia that what we're seeing is not a misunderstanding. This isn't a case of the Kremlin getting it wrong and accidentally going after the wrong people, The Economist reports Alaudinov as saying. Rather, the incidents involving these bloggers represent the starting point of what he claims will be a wider crackdown on people that he labels as Russia's internal enemies. And Alaudinov is taking his new job very seriously. He has warned Russia's Z bloggers that they need to find some sort of common ground with the Kremlin, else they will be destroyed legally. Alaudinov added, "The machine will ramp up to such an extent that they will all be stunned." These statements hint at one of the reasons why Russia has suddenly turned its back on its Z bloggers while simultaneously placing them in the firing. Before we get into why all of this is happening, it's important to understand the roles that these bloggers play, both within Russia and in the wider context of Putin's Ukraine invasion. The BBC provided most of the basics in an April 2023 profile, where it asked the questions of who these bloggers are and why they have become so popular inside Russia. It notes that Russia's war bloggers aren't part of any sort of mainstream news organization or a formalized network. Instead, they're a loose assortment of people, collectively known as voyenkori in Russia, who act a little like independent correspondents who disseminate news to the Russian people via social media platforms like Telegram. That news is rarely impartial, as Z bloggers often tinge everything they say with anti-Western and anti-Ukrainian perspectives. But if that's the case, why would the average Russian care about what these bloggers have to say? The propagandist's approach to delivering news to the Russian people is already being followed by Russia's state media, which would seemingly make Russia's pro-war bloggers pointless. Except this isn't the case. Due to operating outside of the state media confines, Russia's Z bloggers often provide more in-depth reporting on what is happening during the Ukraine war than Russia's state media newspapers and TV stations. Many of the bloggers are also not shy about criticizing what they see as Russian military incompetence, and there has been a lot of that. However, they almost always stop short of criticizing the special military operation, and they don't say a word against Putin himself. Whatever failings they see in the Russian military are always the fault of people other than Putin, and they often make that very clear in their posts. The BBC reports on the words of one of those bloggers named Yuri Kotyanok that gives you a sense of the flavor of a typical post. "Even cancer can be cured, but Ukrainianism, never," Kotyanok has posted to Telegram in the past. "It's a type of Satanism that can only be destroyed by one thing, fire, all-consuming fire that will cleanse this filth." With words like that, it's hard to believe that the Kremlin could ever label a Z blogger as a foreign agent or a terrorist. But it has, and it will continue to do so. And in doing so will limit the effectiveness of a group of people who have probably been more beneficial to the Ukraine war narrative that Putin wants to encourage them most. As the Moscow Times said in its own profile on these types of bloggers, they will often share in-depth maps and information tinged with the sort of pro-Kremlin propaganda that Putin would surely love. Extreme nationalist viewpoints are often shared, as are detailed examples of Ukraine's military failures. Many of these bloggers even try to help out with Russian military recruitment by detailing ways that their subscribers can help out the Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine. Often with hundreds of thousands of followers, pro-war channels occupy a curious niche in the Russian media landscape, the Moscow Times reports. Following a crackdown that virtually wiped out independent war coverage, the pro-war channels are some of the only platforms in Russia to deliver relatively reliable information about the situation at the front. CNN adds to this, noting that Z bloggers often have sources that are deeply entrenched in the Russian military, which is why they're able to provide information that isn't shared by state media sources. Many also have links to pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine and the Wagner Group. It may have been this type of access that led to Putin allowing them to criticize the Russian military when they felt it was warranted. In this respect, a Z blogger's knowledge of what was happening on the front lines could have been used by the Kremlin to shape the Ukraine war by responding to reports of military failures with fixes. Whether that actually happened or not is up for debate. But these bloggers have been able to express opinions fairly freely for years without any real blowback until now. In August 2023, the United States Institute of Peace argued that Z bloggers and their soft immunity could even use their platforms to argue for an even harder stance on Ukraine than Putin has taken publicly. The same outlet says that these bloggers also often have elite backers operating behind the scenes, meaning many may serve as proxies for people both within the Kremlin and outside of it to express their viewpoints without revealing who they really are. The extremism of some of these bloggers could also make it more difficult for Putin to bring the Ukraine war to any sort of negotiated conclusion, the Institute adds, which brings us nicely back to something we touched on earlier in the video: Russia's reasons for going after so many of its Z bloggers. The Economist builds on the comments made by Alaudinov that we shared earlier by highlighting the words of an analyst named Ivan Filipov. He claims that Russia turning its back on its bloggers represents a struggle between species in the Russian pro-war blogosphere. On one side of this struggle, you have the bloggers themselves. On the other side are more powerful media players, often part of state institutions, that are unhappy about these bloggers revealing information that they either don't have or that the Kremlin may have deemed unsuitable for publication. Based on that interpretation, Z bloggers being punished and arrested may be the result of a battle about narrative. State media agencies, which are supposed to be backed by Putin, want to control that narrative, and Russia's war bloggers are wresting that control away from them. This might also play into the United States Institute of Peace's argument that Z bloggers and their extreme views make it more difficult for Putin to negotiate a peace settlement. How can anybody trust Putin's claims that he wants peace when he has bloggers calling for the complete destruction of Ukraine that seem to have some sort of Kremlin approval? That may be the thought process in the Kremlin, that the taking down of Z bloggers under the auspices of them supposedly being traitors against Russia may simply be a way for the Kremlin to gain further control over the narrative related to the war. The bloggers may have come a little too close to seizing control of that narrative from Putin. However, there may be another reason the Kremlin is targeting Russia's bloggers. This is a strange reason which has a lot to do with corruption inside Russia. Though Russia's bloggers are minor players in the grand scheme of the war, The Economist says, they may have served a bigger role than the Kremlin would like people to know about. The state has clearly invested heavily in mass-producing arms to devastating effect. Centralized procurement has made all the difference in battlefield metal, such as missiles, glide bombs, and extended-range drones. But a lot of the less flashy kit, local jamming station, medical supplies, is procured by donation campaigns led by the Z bloggers or by soldiers themselves, the outlet claims. This gels with reports that the Russian soldiers have resorted to crowdfunding to get their hands on even some of the most basic equipment. Rumors of crowdfunding have been circulating since June 2022, per a report by The Telegraph. In September 2025, the Kyiv Post practically confirmed those rumors, with the release of a brief transcript from an intercepted call that revealed how poor the average Russian soldier's equipment situation is on the front lines. Gas canisters are not issued. What we get is canned meat, grains, and cigarettes, and that's it, nothing else. The rest we have to buy with our own money, or people send it from home, the outlet reports one soldier is saying. So there's another layer to the control aspect of why Putin wants Russia's war bloggers gone. If those bloggers are taking to their platforms to actively campaign for donations that fund the purchasing of equipment for Russia's soldiers, that also means they're exposing the fact that Russia isn't providing that equipment. Think about what that means for Putin's narrative. He wants Russia to appear as an indomitable military monster against which Ukraine can't defend. If that military's soldiers are being supported by anybody other than the Russian state, the illusion falls apart. Filipov even tells The Economist that one of his theories is that the Kremlin is trying to exert more control over the Z bloggers, so that it can divert the funds those bloggers raise to loyalists that are under Putin's control. That's where the corruption comes in. As extreme as the Z bloggers often are in their opinions, they seem to be at least trusted to spend the money they receive in donations on the equipment they say they'll send to Russia's soldiers. The Kremlin appears to have seen a potential revenue stream here, and it may want to control that money just as it controls the Ukraine war narrative. And if a few Putin loyalists get to make some extra rubles in the bargain, then locking up a few bloggers is a small price to pay. What it all seems to come down to is that the Z bloggers have gotten a little too big for their boots. Now Putin is going to put them in their place. We mentioned earlier in the video that these bloggers have always seemed to have some sort of immunity that allows them to criticize aspects of the Russian military as long as they don't attack Putin himself. There are plenty of examples of this criticism. In its report on what's happening to Russia's bloggers, United 24 Media says that these bloggers have openly criticized both corruption and mismanagement in the Russian Defense Ministry. But they always did so under the auspices of that criticism helping the Russian forces on the front. It may also be no coincidence that Putin has conducted military purges throughout the war, including the ousting of former Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu in 2024. Arrests have become commonplace, and Putin may have been using the Z bloggers to point him in the direction of those whom he should target, prior to Putin setting his sights on the bloggers themselves. There's an old poem named First They Came. All of this is starting to feel very reminiscent of the sentiments expressed in this poem. Russia's bloggers are starting to discover that they're not immune from Putin's wrath. Really, that shouldn't be a surprise. As far back as September 2022, The Guardian was reporting that some of these bloggers were claiming that Russia had lost the Ukraine war due to the special military operation turning into a brutal attritional contest. ABC adds that Russia's bloggers were angry about the supposed inactivity and lack of defenses that allowed Ukraine to pull off the spectacular Operation Spiderweb, in which Ukraine snuck drones into Russia to take out a large portion of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. For almost 4 years, it seems like Putin has tolerated these bloggers because they provide information and an outlet for public anger. It's better for the everyday Russian to fume in the comments section of a Telegram post than it is for them to take to the streets and protest Putin. However, the power was never meant to be with these bloggers, and once commentary on the Ukraine war was transformed into the active seeking of donations, Putin and his Kremlin cronies must have sensed that Russia's Z bloggers were veering a little too close to gaining a level of power that might pose even the smallest of challenges to the official Russian narrative, so they had to be shut down. Or more accurately, some of the most prominent Z bloggers were targeted to send a message to the rest. Fall in line, or the Kremlin will come calling for you next. Russia's bloggers are confused about what's happening and who is to blame for the fate that has befallen some of their number. However, Alyokin seems to be pretty clear about what the Kremlin is doing via the legal mechanisms that it's created. Amidst criticism that the Kremlin machine itself has spun out of control, he claims that Putin's liberalization of the blogging space has allowed some people to seize control from the president. That control has to be taken back, and the arrests are part of the method that Putin is using to ensure that happens. What this means for the future of Ukraine war information inside Russia seems pretty clear. Though biased, Russia's Z bloggers could once be relied upon to serve as a source of information that was more accurate and based in reality than Russia's state media. Now, assuming that Putin has his way, those bloggers face two choices: either continue doing what they're doing and face the same consequences as those that the Kremlin has already targeted, or become part of the Russian state media machine, meaning they lose their niche and are reduced to little more than complete puppets to the narrative that Putin wants to push. Either way, this could be the death of semi-independent journalism inside Russia. Putin has once again betrayed his people, as his paranoia leads him to exercise as much control as possible. It shouldn't come as a surprise that Putin is so intent on exerting more control. Russia's president is terrified of both internal and external threats. So terrified, in fact, that he's built a series of fake offices throughout Russia so that nobody knows where he is at any given time. Find out all about those offices in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Putin's slip into paranoid madness. And thank you as always for watching.